Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. Today's guest is a licensed paralegal and has her own practice, the Palma and Associates. So thank you so much, Christina, for joining us here today. And perhaps you can start by telling us a bit about your practice, the areas, how you got into practice, and then we can go from there.
Perfect. Well, thanks for having me. Happy to be here. At least now these days we can all just join from wherever we're sitting, which is great. So like you said, I own Palma and Associates Legal Services. Our first and main office is in Wasaga Beach. So if any of you were one of those that spent the summer up here or came up here on the weekend, it's a beautiful place to be. And we opened up here in 2016. The firm then grew staff-wise first, and then grew to another office earlier this year. So we're now also in Aurelia, and we have a part-time occasional office in Barrie, should clients need to meet there as well. And just kind of a little bit, we do small claims court, landlord-tenant disputes, traffic tickets, and then kind of just small claims is really broad. So depending on what comes our way, exactly going to small claims court. But those are kind of our main three areas of practice.
Perfect. So maybe let's start then in terms of what brought you into getting into law and then practicing as a paralegal, and what was what that experience like?
So I think I was one of those people that always wanted to be in the law in some capacity. It was always a dream of mine. Did actually write the LSAT and get into law school. Unfortunately, life took a turn unexpectedly, and I ended up not going that route and taking a year off in between finishing university and then subsequently going back to college. During that year, I lived abroad. I lived in England, and I kind of just took some time to figure out what I wanted to do after that kind of drastic change in what I thought the path would be. And that led me to paralegal. I went to Humber. I did their 2-year paralegal program there. And then kind of life took another turn and I ended up coming up this way. So it's really just been something that I've always wanted to get into. And people sometimes ask if I feel like I wish I had gone to law school or if I want to go to law school in the future. And I can honestly say I'm extremely happy being a paralegal and running this office with my incredible staff. I'm super happy the way I am. And I guess everything happens for a reason. I'm a huge believer in that. So law school wasn't in the path for me, but I think that what ended up being my path may actually have even been better. So kind of always just what I wanted to do, just maybe got there a little different than I thought.
That's great. I mean, I think one of the things that I've talked to so many different people here on is that there are all these different unique paths, right? That there's not something that you do this, you go to university, you then go get a college degree or go to law school or whatever. I mean, there's so many different ways people have, like, same with the person I was talking with yesterday, in the middle of law school, they went and we were overseas. So I think there's all sorts of different paths. And I think for students, recognize that you forge your own path, and all of our great speakers we've had are here to show you the different routes that they've taken to get where they are. Now, Christina, did you go right after getting your license? I know today, actually, I've seen maybe, I know you teach as well, probably getting some of those messages. Hey, I passed the licensing exam. So it's a big day for a lot of people who look into getting into the profession. So maybe you can go back to that day. You got your license. Did you go right into opening your practice, or what was the route that you took then?
So I wrote the licensing exam in August of 2016. And to answer your question, the firm was open at the end of September. So yes, not what I would suggest. As much as that's what I did, I think I maybe hit more bumps because I did it that way. If you could somehow get some experience before doing that. But I forged right ahead and I opened up as soon as I possibly could, and then incorporated the business within a few days. So yes, but maybe not what I would suggest to those other than not, maybe don't follow that path unless you're really committed to it like I was. But I think it was just a little more difficult than had I had a little bit of experience first.
All right, so let's look at that. I mean, maybe again, as you said, not jumping right in right after getting your license, like 3 weeks, 6 weeks later there, but maybe you have the opportunity, or you may have gotten that experience over the year before you were writing the exam. Um, what was sort of the first steps there in terms of getting your practice started, and once you kind of got there, you were like, well, there's all these bumps there. How do you kind of
Mhm.
power through that? Because again, it's certainly very challenging. You're new to the profession. You have your own business. I mean, I think a lot of, I'm also teaching practice management, I was telling you before,
Okay.
and legal accounting, right? Where you're learning about all these things that don't have to do with, understanding small claims court procedures, or landlord and tenant hearing, how to get all of that taken care of. You're looking at more of the business of running a law practice. And how
Mhm.
did you kind of pick that up, and what can you share from those bumps in the road that you had at the beginning?
Um, I think some of the bumps that I came into were because I was also new to this geographic area. So I was new to business. I was new to living in Wasaga Beach. Wasaga Beach is a small town, so people, everyone knows everyone, and I was trying to break into that with also a business that a lot of people don't, unfortunately, understand what a paralegal is. So I was coming in almost with more against me than I had going for me at that point. I was brand new. I couldn't even say to people, I'm a paralegal with all this experience. You can trust me. I was coming into new town, no experience, new business, and then learning to be a paralegal because, JP, you and I both know in teaching in this program, we'll teach you the theory. We'll try and get you as far, ahead as we possibly can. But once you get into the real world, it's a whole nother beast, right? So you're trying to learn that while trying to learn how to run a business. I had never run any other type of business before. Um, so it really just became, I had to be all in. If I wasn't all in, I would have failed. Right. So everything I had, everything I would have went into running this business. I have to say it came with an incredible support of my husband at home that, kind of made sure that we were okay at the home life. And I was able to commit everything I had to the firm. But then, like, some of the bumps just come. Like, how do you market your business and spend money on marketing when you're not necessarily making money yet? Right. But you can't make money without a client coming in the door. So you get stuck in this vicious circle. So kind of overcoming that in the first few months when the money coming in wasn't as much necessarily as the money going out. And then the biggest one for me was deciding whether I wanted to be in a commercial space or work from home. I think the last year and a half, a lot of people ended up working from home, maybe unexpectedly over the pandemic. But 5.5 years ago, that wasn't the thing when I was opening. Uh, but that's another big expense that you have to consider when you don't have the money coming in. So I ultimately made the decision that I wanted to be in a commercial space. I found a woman that was willing to rent space to me at a very reasonable price. Being in a small town, I was able to find that person. But there was a lot to go into it. But it's certainly come around now 5.5 years later, thankfully. But the bumps, if you can power through them and you can give it your all, they'll mean nothing at the end when you can look back and say that you've overcome them all.
Yeah, perfect. Because I mean, 5.5 years later, you have 3 offices that you're operating. So maybe you could share some of that growth there, and how, once you've gotten through that initial period where, again, it's kind of like baptism by fire, right? Like you have to figure
Mhm.
out how things are going, and every day presents like a different challenge. How did you kind of then get into that groove where, you were bringing on associates afterwards and other staff? Um, what kind of, was there like this like eureka moment, or like the light bulb suddenly went on, or what happened?
Uh, no eureka moment. I wish I did, but no. I think I found my niche. So I became really well known in the community in the landlord tenant realm. A lot of realtors got to know who I was. A lot of the bigger landlords in town got to know who I was. Um, And that started opening doors for me that I'm still going through now, all these years later. That I brought on my first associate just over, you can basically say, a year into business. I was overwhelmed and I knew I couldn't take on any more work just being myself. And that associate actually fell into my lap. There was no interview. I didn't post a job. It was a student that had finished her program, wrote the licensing exam and was trying to break into the industry, sent me an email. I joke with her all the time. And she's told me to feel free to tell this story as much as I wanted to. She sent me an email from an email address that was like not anything really overly professional. But I still read it. And it turns out that she has been the godsend. So she is like my right and left hand, that girl. And she kind of took the ball and ran with it for anything that I gave her. And she gave me the opportunity to have the secondary satellite office in Barrie. And then we didn't grow staff or locations wise for a while. We were growing our client base and making sure that that was sustainable before we took on anybody else. And then in May of this year, so just about 3.5 years after I took on the first associate, I took on the next. And she's actually in the other room at the moment. She's finishing up a hearing. But I took her on after teaching her in the program at college, and she's turned out great. Now, she also gave me the opportunity to open in Aurelia. So in June of this year, we opened the Aurelia office, which is a full-time, fully staffed location. And then we moved into a new space for the Wasaga office in August. And 2 weeks ago, brought on a legal assistant who is waiting to write his paralegal licensing exam. So a lot of growth over the last year, a little bit in between, not too much, growing the client base more than growing the business. And now we're kind of just seeing what 2022 and fingers crossed the end of this pandemic brings in terms of maybe another office or more people.
Perfect. So, I mean, 3 different locations there. And I think, what is it like? I mean, first of all, in Wasaga Beach, right? I mean, I know other than maybe on the weekends in the summer that it gets really busy from all the Toronto people coming up for, the beaches, if the weather is nice. What's it like practicing in Wasaga Beach? I mean, I guess let's look at it pre-pandemic and then in the pandemic where everything changed because now you can have clients anywhere. But what was it? What was the sort of was there like a hustle and bustle period, or how did you kind of look at getting traction? And then, and again, it was a new place for you as well, not on top of that, as you mentioned. So how did that all go?
Well, I had to first get used to living in a small town. I came from Woodbridge. So coming from Vaughan, it was a very different experience, and I had to get used to that quickly in order to make business work. But Wasaga Beach is honestly an incredible place. I love it here. I wouldn't move my business anywhere else. It's kind of a little bit of a misconception that we are a weekend town or, fully supported by people that come here from the city. We are a bustling full-time town here in Wasaga Beach. And I generally get the majority of my business and my clients are people that are here full-time. So they are either here full-time or they own property here full-time that they're having issues with in the landlord-tenant realm. So I had that same worry, JP. I had the same misconception when I was moving up here. I was like, how could I run a business in a town that was maybe busy for like 2 months out of the year? July and August, and then everybody goes home. It was a very common misconception. But I was very glad that it was a misconception because I don't think I could have necessarily survived on just that short period of time. Business does go up a little bit in terms of, maybe some of the traffic tickets or those sorts of violations, but we're generally, pretty steady all year round, thanks to the people that call Wasaga Beach home.
Oh, that's great to hear. I mean, as you probably mentioned, I guess they're the traffic tickets, and then maybe if there's some short-term rentals or something, there's any issues, then maybe that comes up as well. So in terms of your practice, is it kind of evenly split, or is there an area that kind of tends to be more that you're finding yourself appearing in small claims court or landlord tenant? What's the breakdown?
It's pretty evenly split between landlord tenant and small claims. Traffic tickets is a very small portion of what we do. I love doing them. It's just they're not our area of focus. So we get things that come in that we feel like we could handle, or some of the more major charges that we don't necessarily feel like are within our area of specialty. We will refer those out to make sure the client is getting the best representation that they possibly can. But in terms of the other two, we're a pretty even split between landlord tenant and small claims. Kind of, I like it that way because I like both, and my staff like both. So we're happy to see it that way. But in the landlord tenant realm, we're also, I wouldn't say evenly split. We do generally represent landlords a lot more often than the tenant side, but we do represent both. And when some paralegals choose to do one or the other, I feel like it was, there are genuine need on both sides. So I felt like it would have been a disservice to the public to have only chosen one or the other. So we do represent both. Just generally, landlords tend to come to us more often.
And now, as I mentioned before, obviously with COVID, things changed. So in terms of those two main practice areas, what was it like March 2020 when
The
COVID
world shut
hits?
down.
Yeah, the world shut down. But let's say specifically, with respect to those areas, I don't know if even small claims is fully operational to the point it is today compared to it was February 2020. So what changed exactly there, and how? You mentioned again thinking about, do I want to have an actual office or do I want to work from home? Did any of those things reconsider them in light of what was going on?
So I did reconsider the work from home scenario just for the safety of my staff. That was paramount for me. So we did go to a work from home model for quite some time during the pandemic. In terms of court, those two main areas came to a screeching halt. The landlord tenant board only did very few, only urgent matters between March and August of 2020. So you can imagine it was really frustrating for clients that were waiting for results, and I really couldn't tell them when things were going to happen. And if I could tell them, I really had not even a guesstimate on when things were going to happen. Same with small claims court. I was actually scheduled to be in court the next day, and I got a call from the court clerk, and I knew something was wrong because the tone of her voice was not great when I answered the phone. And she said, "You're not coming to court tomorrow. Court's adjourned. We'll get back to it when we can." And I remember asking her very clearly, "Do you know how long? Like, what are we looking at here?" She goes, "Oh, not more than a couple of weeks." And it turned out to be several months as the pandemic progressed. But having to be in court the following day, like, I'm ready. I'm ready to go. I'm in my office. I had everything set. The client was prepped. We were all ready to go. To then call the client in, late afternoon, saying, "Don't worry about tomorrow. It's not happening." Right. And we didn't do much in small claims court for a really long time. There were several months that there was nothing. Things slowly started to open again, kind of at a snail's pace to start doing some things. We're starting to get trials again, which is nice because there is a lot of files in the filing cabinet that are just waiting for a trial date. But it was difficult to manage client expectations during that time when they so desperately needed a result, and I couldn't give them anything. I couldn't even give them a timeline, nothing. It was really difficult to manage that. And then have everybody at home when I was used to being able to, just poke my head into somebody's office and ask them a question, or even just socialize with someone. We lost a lot of that, right? I went from having clients sit in front of me for a consultation to having to call them on the phone and trying to get the same message across. But we made it work, and we're here, and we're stronger, and we grew during the pandemic, which I'm really proud about. But it certainly wasn't easy.
And so how have you liked, I mean, in terms of, you mentioned full trials, full hearings, what's that like from your experience doing it on, I think, on Microsoft Teams or on Zoom compared to being able to do it in person? So you mentioned some of the differences. Obviously, we can talk about that as well with client meetings over Zoom versus in person, talking to your staff over Zoom while they're in person. I mean, even teaching, I guess, the same thing that I had
Yeah.
to go through, right? What kind of did you learn from that experience?
Well, we're still on Zoom for court across the board. It took some getting used to. I didn't ever think I'd be questioning a witness over a computer screen, sometimes without their cameras on, which is a little bit concerning. But from a productivity point of view, they might have given us some benefit, right? So instead of, you know, 45-minute drive to the Barrie landlord tenant board, sit around and wait all day and you can't really do anything while you're waiting, and then have a 45-minute drive back when you're done, you really have done nothing else other than that client's matter that day. uh, Eliminating the drive alone has been great. But if I know, like, it's not my matter being called, I have my laptop, I have files, there are things here in the office that you can do. So productivity has definitely changed for the better. You're obviously still very much paying attention to the cases that are being heard, even for your own learning, and waiting your turn. But you have the ability to, maybe look at a file that's on your desk, or answer an email, or catch up on some invoicing that you weren't able to do when we were going to court in person. So what we've lost, we have also gained on the other side, other things. So it's difficult because what we lost is really significant. Right? It means a lot to be able to be in court and be in front of somebody in person, but we have had some gain that we have to consider as well as business owners, what that means for our time.
And maybe any tips for students in terms of advocacy? We always have these mock trials, and again, switching from in person to
Mhm.
doing them remotely sometimes is a different challenge. And again, and I always tell them, well, you're prepared for the real world, because a lot of that productivity was gained. And I think we're not going to see things where you have the maybe simple appearances where you'd have to go in to court
Hmm.
in person, wait forever, or drive. First of all, drive sometimes for an
Yeah.
hour, wait for an hour, then all these other matters go, then another hour, and then you talk for 30 seconds, and you get a new date for a hearing or a trial, and then go back and make the drive, right? So while all that's happening, I mean, unless you're really good on like a small tablet or a phone, right, you're not doing much, just sitting around waiting. So from that experience, I guess, what in terms of tips for advocacy, let's say, in a Zoom or Teams era, what are some of the things that maybe you've done differently in preparation or on delivery on a matter, or even like a settlement conference, that you would have
Hmm.
done differently in person?
One of the things we've had to overcome is whether we have clients come here and log in with us, or do they log in from their own location? So am I at least having my client with me, or are we dealing with also my client being remote and I don't have that ability to interact with them at all in private? It depends on the client and what they would like to do. We offer both scenarios for a client depending on their preference, but that's certainly going to be one that you have to look at going forward. If we're starting to do some of these small claims court trials, is it worth maybe at least having your client in your office and then everybody else remotely? But even I say to my students, it is easier than ever now to observe, right? Get into a Zoom link for the landlord tenant board and even just have it on in the background, right? If you're not in class one day, or you're not in class for a couple of hours, and you can, grab one of the links and go in and just label yourself as an observer. They'll put you into one of the hearing rooms, and you can at least watch and see, oh, I really like what that, paralegal or lawyer has done. Oh, I really don't like what they have done. I don't want to be like that. It's easier than ever now to do that. So I think being able to take advantage of that as a student would be fantastic, right? You get to see what the real world is like before you even get out into it yourself as a practicing paralegal. So take advantage of that. Maybe learn some ways to make the Zoom world a little easier for you, like having your client here and only dealing remotely with the other party if you can. And what, like, the one thing that really bugs me, still be professionally dressed, even though you're on a Zoom call, or, and really all you see is like from the shoulders up. It still is your, what you're putting out there for yourself as a paralegal or a lawyer. Like, be professionally dressed and be in a professional space, please. It really bothers me.
I saw you mentioned your students. I know you've taught some legal accounting, and my students are doing legal accounting and practice management, 2 courses right now. And I did see something on, I think you posted it a couple of days ago, and I think it's interesting about fees there, right? You put a question: do you charge for phone calls and meetings with your clients? And I know I was teaching my students, docketing in the 0.1, 0.2 every 6 minutes. So maybe you could tell us a bit about that and what sort of the strategy behind that, and how it makes things maybe easier for you in terms of everything, and what came about it.
So we decided when I opened the firm, one of the big things is, do you charge by the hour? Do you charge a flat rate? Do you charge a contingency? All these sorts of things you have to decide. I ultimately decided on a flat rate. I think it's a little bit more transparent and accessible for people that way. Totally understand when paralegals charge by the hour. Sometimes I probably make less on a matter than I could have if I charged by the hour. But in terms of, do we charge for meetings with our clients or phone calls with our clients? No, I've never done that. I want my clients to be able to feel like they can ask me a question, get an update on their matter, just talk something out with me without worrying about the bill that will come at the end of that. Do I want to do that with the other side for free? Usually not. I still don't even charge for those most of the time. But our clients need to know that we're accessible to them. And when they have questions, especially during the pandemic, when there really wasn't a lot of court happening and they just wanted to know, when am I going to get to court? What's happening, Christina? Is there any update? Right. A bill shouldn't come to them after that. I get it's still your time. I completely understand that paralegals that choose to charge for it. I just decided that it wasn't something that I wanted to put into my business model, just so that people felt like I was accessible to them and they can get updates and ask questions freely without any concern. And, if it starts taking up a lot of time, then yes, it's something that you have to consider as a business owner, but I just never thought that was the way I wanted to go. But you certainly can as a paralegal. I'm not saying that you shouldn't charge for those things. I just chose not to.
And then related to that, I mean, I think the other thing I was talking about in accounting, the first day of class was, someone was asking about retainers and retainer agreements, and you mentioned there about initial consultations and clients coming into you. So how does that all work there for you with respect to that, and in terms of being able to provide that and helping them, grow with their matter and deal with their matter without having to worry, well, how much is this going to cost me just to come and talk to a legal professional?
So our consultations are free, and then follow-up calls and emails and what meetings with the clients are free. We charge on a flat rate, and the client gets a very detailed fee schedule before they decide to retain, so they know upfront what it's going to cost them. We're very transparent with that. And then we don't take an upfront retainer. So the client pays as things are done for them, in an effort for me to build trust with my client before asking them to hand over a hefty check, right? It came with the market that I'm in. I didn't think that being new to this geographic area, being new to business, that I really could, in good conscience, ask for a big upfront retainer from someone. I wanted them to trust me first. So as soon as I start doing things for them and they're understanding that, A, I know what I'm doing, and B, I'm actually doing what I'm saying I'm doing for them, then they'll get an invoice and they generally feel a little bit more comfortable paying for it at that point, because they've already seen the service that they're getting already done for them. Does it take a risk on my part? Absolutely. Right? Have I been burned? Yes, I have. Not gonna lie about that or sugarcoat that. I have been burned. Um, but it, it's worked for me, and I'm happy with the way it is. Sometimes you have to take a hit. It's unfortunate, but that's part of running a business in any industry. And I'm not going to complain that it takes away the trust accounting that I would have to do. So when you're a business owner running a firm and staff and locations and everything else that you have to do to be able to eliminate, a big part of trust accounting, I'm not complaining about.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you about getting burned there, and I knew that. I mean, even from where clients, even if they put some money, then if you're doing the work and waiting for them to come get to pay afterwards, there's always that risk of them not paying, or even after the matter's finished, and you're like, oh, here's how much it costs. I got you a really great. I know I got your tenant evicted for you. You think, hey, thanks so much, Christina. Here you go. How did you kind of sort of in dealing with that being burned, still look at the positives there, as you pointed out, that you've built all this trust, and it's the cost of doing business? Would you do it any differently now that you've gone through all that experience?
Some days I think maybe I would, but no. Honestly, when those days pass, and maybe it's just been a bad day of a client, not wanting to pay, no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't change it. And I joke about the fact that at least I don't have to do the trust accounting. But the main reason for me is just that trust with the client, and they get the opportunity to, maybe they can't afford a larger retainer, but they can afford to do like a pay as you go idea, right? So they can get that access to justice that they need, even though they can't necessarily pay the upfront retainer. So I wouldn't change it. On the days that I've been burned, you might ask me that question and get a different answer. But no, like really thinking back on everything, I wouldn't change it, and I don't plan on changing it anytime in the future.
I did want to switch gears a little bit, because I know most of the students that I have in my evening class that are going to start a bit later they're at the beginning of the program, as opposed to the ones at the end there. And so they're learning about legal research and writing and legal communications. And I mean, you did share us that nice anecdote about the unprofessional email address, but it worked out there for your left and right hand. But anything you can share in terms of maybe in terms of whether it's communications within the office, in terms of organization and memos to file, or even just legal research memos, anything that you found that's really helped you from school or from teaching, that you can impart with the students that are beginning the program?
Communication in this industry is of the utmost importance. You need clear instruction from your client. You need to have clear communication with the client, understanding that they don't know the legalese like you do. So there has to be some clarity there, and presented to a client in the way that they're going to fully understand it and be able to give you a very informed response back. When you are a student, or maybe somebody trying to get into the industry, so if you're applying for jobs, or you're trying to communicate, or just sending out those cold emails to see if somebody needs any help, please just put it in what I can say is a very big piece of advice. As the employer who could potentially be reading those, I want to know how you can help me. What are you going to bring here? Not this, and that, this, and that in your emails. I want you to show me as the employer, or as the paralegal, that you're trying to impress or speak to. What can you bring here to me? What are you going to give me that I don't have right now? So if you can present your communication that way when you're trying to get into the industry, personally, I would think it would be better received. It would certainly be better received by me. And I would think a lot of my colleagues in the industry would probably echo that same sentiment. And then just professional. So if you don't have a professional email address, make one. It's very easy. It could still be at Gmail or at hotmail.com, but just the first part of it, try and make it a little bit more professional. I don't want your 2002 email address that was, made while you're in high school and maybe not the most appropriate, right? Something that's going to be if I see an email from that, I'm A, first not going to think it's spam, and B, want to actually open it and get a sense that you are a professional in this industry that's trying to communicate with me. And try and please have a proper subject line on an email. How many of those I see that there's just no subject line at all, or something that is just not very clear or professional? So if you're trying to get in to talk to someone, or even as a paralegal, right, put in something appropriate in the subject line, even if it's just the client's name and then the name of the other side on an email, right? Something that you show that what the email is going to be about, and you've actually put the time in to put something instead of just no subject line at all. But communication is so important in this industry, and if you're trying to get into it, or if you've been in it for a really long time, it doesn't change. You have to have the utmost professionalism in your communication in order to really succeed in the industry.
Now, with that, you mentioned obviously trying to get into the industry, and again, you've had, I think you have new associates, you've had students as well. What can you share kind of with anyone here in terms of getting in, especially now with it being a little bit more challenging with, it's not as easy to, well, I mean, maybe today it's a little bit easier. Maybe it's certainly outside of the GTA, probably a little easier to go and have in-person meetings. Mm-hmm. But kind of with a little bit of that backdrop there of communications through email and LinkedIn and maybe text messages, what's a good way to kind of build your network and find mentors in the profession, especially, again, if someone is going to go down the route that, you didn't necessarily advocate them repeating, where they want to open up practice, like we talked about the people who just got their good news letters from the Law Society today, and they're like, well, what am I going to do now? What would you tell them in terms of getting networked within the industry, as well as getting the right mentors?
Number one, I would say, is don't be stuck on your job title actually having paralegal in it. There are a lot of ways to use those skills and use that education in a way that might not necessarily have paralegal in the title. So even if you get into a firm as a law clerk or a legal assistant, or you ask to volunteer and help them out and show that there's you can bring some value to their office. Or when you go and do your placement, be a sponge, right? Absorb everything that you possibly can, learn as much as you can, and maybe show that placement host that, you're of value and they want to keep you around. But just don't be so, closed-minded to what a paralegal job is once you get your paralegal license. There are a lot of other industries that can use those same skills, or even just other roles that could potentially grow to, being a paralegal. Like, I'll give you the example that the associate that we hired a couple of weeks ago, he's here as a legal assistant, while he's waiting to write his licensing exam. He is giving, me the opportunity to see that he would be of value as a paralegal. So the next hire that I need in that role, maybe he's going to be considered for that, instead of just, posting a job and hiring somebody I don't know, right? Is it the job necessarily that he would have wanted when he finished the program? No, but he's also not a paralegal yet. So not being so within that box of, I'm graduated, I've gotten my paralegal license, my job title absolutely has to have paralegal in it. I have people from my cohort at Humber that are working in the insurance industry, right? And they're, they use those skills to translate into that industry, and they're, incredibly happy. I have other people from my cohort that opened their own firms, or met somebody in the program and decided to open up a partnership, and that's great too. But there's a lot in between that people tend to forget about, that you can most definitely use your skills, even though the role doesn't necessarily, or your business card doesn't necessarily say paralegal on it. But just be open to those kinds of things, because you never know where it could lead in the future, or it's just already using the skills that you've gotten as a paralegal.
Yeah, that's certainly great advice, because I think a lot of people want to have that title that well, I went to school to be a paralegal, so I want to be working as a paralegal, and if I'm not, then why did I go to school, or why did I go through the licensing process and get the license? So in terms of that, in terms of now going and then obviously starting your practice, and then we've talked about that at length there, what in terms of, for anyone looking to have, or who are already running a practice, anything that you can share in terms of, getting through those difficult days, the days where someone doesn't pay you in the end, or you have a really challenging appearance, what kind of helps you, and especially, we've been talking about mental health and in the profession, and certainly the challenges for legal professionals of coping with everything. What are some things that have worked for you in terms of keeping you going, and not being facing all of those burdens that come with running a practice?
Um, so this lovely computer that I'm on now, as much as I am tied to it, at 8 o'clock in the morning till about 5 or 6 o'clock at night, after that it stays here. I don't bring it home. I try and cut that time to now be with my family, and unwind from the day. I might have had a really difficult court appearance, or a client or the opposing side that was giving me trouble. I don't need to take that home and be so tempted. So, because I was really bad with that, like really tempted to go and open my emails and see if they've responded, right? Or, has that client actually sent me money? There is nothing more important than your mental health. And when you are running a business, it can be very taxing when you're running any sort of business. Add in the fact that we are in a naturally, combative industry and very argumentative industry. I like to tell my husband there's no way he's winning an argument with me because I argue for a living, right? That has to stay at work. And I was admittedly very terrible with that. Like when I was working at home in between office locations and then the pandemic, I was on this thing like all the time. And I was looking to see if somebody responded to my email. I was sending emails late at night, early in the morning. I couldn't turn it off. And I have gotten a lot better with that and leaving this here, and being able to have some time to myself. And then I'm incredibly blessed that I have staff that I can rely on. So, I can put in, it doesn't happen often, unfortunately, but I can put in some time, like an hour, to say, I'm just going to go get some lunch. And I go get some lunch. I'm going to, unwind for an hour, and then I'll be back with a clearer head. But if it gets to the point where you don't want to do this job anymore, you're not doing yourself any good. So if you're able to unwind, put your mental health and your stress at importance, and make sure that that's taken care of, and your own self-care, you'll want to come back to work every day. But if you get to the point where you just don't want to do it, and a lot of paralegals unfortunately end up in that burnout, you're not doing yourself any favors. So you might as well take care of yourself throughout, so that you can stay in this industry long term. Like, I'm not even 30. So I'm 29 years old. I want to be in this industry for a very long time. But had I kept going the way I was going, I don't know if that necessarily would have been possible. So being able to turn off and just go home and enjoy your time at home, and know that something can wait until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, that's okay. And telling yourself that's okay is really important.
And so I think the follow up then is how what helped you kind of get to that, because you're mentioning coming, especially during the pandemic, bringing it. And I think, even myself, sometimes there's the tendencies to look at your phone. Okay, let me just scroll down there and refresh, and maybe something else will be here. What kind of convinced you to be able to just leave the work at work, or leave the computer off, or the phone off now, and then focus on your time at home with your family? Was there anything that kind of helped, or did just one day you said, well, I can't do this, right? It's taking away from the time I want to spend and enjoy?
Well, we have a company policy that I put in place, and my staff love it. I have a company policy. You do not put your work emails on your phone. That is just work-life balance for me, very important for me and, my staff. At the end of the day, I'm responsible for their, mental health, and making sure that they are taken care of. We do not put our emails on our phone. This actually all changed for me once I was on vacation. And, well, as much as I'll call it a vacation, because it really wasn't. I was away, we'll call it. And I was, out of the country, and my niece came up to me and said, I don't know why you're here. You spend no time with me. And I just looked and I went, my God, she's right. She's right. And she's like 4. So what am I doing wrong? At that point, I was like mid-20s. So what am I doing wrong that this kid at 4 years old can pick up on and realize and say something like that to me? Like, why are you here? Like, you're always on your phone or always on your computer and you say you're working. Like, why did you come and visit me if you're not going to spend any time with me? And from that moment on, I realized that there needed to be a change. And I'm grateful that I have a really, like, he'll joke because he's not going to hear this, but I have a really supportive husband that really makes sure that I stay to that, and also has respect for the times that I can't. So just having that support system at home, but yet no emails on my phone. Something can wait till 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. And just realizing that there are a lot more things in life that are just as, if not more important, that are also going to need your time, including yourself and your family and your friends and your loved ones that need you to be part of their lives. And if you can't get from behind this screen or, in front of your phone, that's going to suffer.
Yeah, that's great. Again, if you can't take care of yourself, then how are you going to be able to take care of your clients, right?
Mhm.
Another thing, I mean, I think I don't know at what point, but certainly, a lot. We're going back to maybe the practice and managing your own business side for those students there. We were learning about advertising and marketing, and I know you're very nice, color scheme there. I'm a fan of black and yellow, black and gold,
yellow,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but and I know I saw there that even at like sporting events, there you have stuff up there. What kind of in terms of getting that all organized in terms of the social media and everything like that, what can you share about building your brand, building your business? I know you've certainly won awards there for for best legal services and things like that. So what kind of helped with kind of getting awareness and getting clients and on the marketing and advertising side that you can share with students who may be opening up a practice one day?
Realizing that wasn't my strength. So I had no idea what should be on a website, how to build a website, what SEO was, should I have a company Facebook page? Like, I really was at a loss. And admitting that and taking into account that there are people that are experts in that area. Once the business was financially able to allow me to do that, I've had the same social media manager for the last almost 4 years, I want to say. I've just lost track. He takes care of everything for me. He understands the rules of what we can and can't, say in our industry. He's fantastic. His team is great. And I let them take the reins on that aspect of things. They keep me up to date. I now have a really good understanding of all the things that come with digital marketing, but because they've taken the time to explain it to me, but they just take the reins and run with it. I then try and find some other avenues. So, digital marketing is not everything. It's huge these days, but it's not the be all and end all of marketing a business. We recently put in a sign at the Molson Center or the Sadlin Arena in Barrie. We have a sign on the rink, right? We're going to see how that goes over the next year. If something, if business comes from that. When we opened in Aurelia, I realized I now had to try and find ways to market in Aurelia. So we're getting some ads on the Aurelia Transit, on the back of the bus, are, different things that I find as a business owner to be able to do. But when you're starting up, the funds aren't necessarily there to do that. I'm very, grateful that I have that opportunity. But when I started up, it was pre-pandemic. So it was like getting myself out there. That's free, right? It doesn't cost you anything to go to networking events in your city or town, or, it doesn't cost much to join your local chamber of commerce or, your local networking groups. things like that that maybe don't cost too much money, that are affordable when you're starting up, that you can then grow into the more expensive things. Like, I'm not going to tell you the Sadlin Arena sign was cheap, but it's something that I'm glad that I can afford to do now, 5.5 years later, right? But as you're getting started, finding those like free or inexpensive things, I was everywhere. Like, I was everywhere I could be. If I could have cloned myself to have been in more than one place at the same time, I probably would have. Like, I just wanted my face everywhere. Because at the end of the day, when people get to know you, they get to know your business, right? And they trust the business that's behind you. But that was, didn't cost me much, if anything. And then some of the little things that I could afford to do have gotten me to a point where I can now afford to do some of the bigger things.
Now, completely different from your practice. I know we were talking about you teaching. So how did you get into teaching? What have you liked most about the experience being an instructor, a legal instructor there at Georgian College?
I got into teaching because I was hosting students for their placement from Georgian. And then an opportunity came very last minute. And I was approached because I had already put out there that I was interested in any opportunities that would have come up. Funny enough, I started teaching with only a couple of weeks notice, not even. And then the world shut down, and I had to gear towards teaching online, which had its perks, but also had a lot of its losses. And I love being able to, and this is going to sound so corny, but it is so true. And I think you're going to agree with me, JP, but when a student gets something and you see the light bulb, like, I can almost, like, it's cartoonish to me that I can like see the light bulb go off, that they get it and they understand something that you've just, taken the time to explain to them, or that you just think is so, like, you get it because you're in the world and you're practicing it every day. But for them to get it as their first introduction to this industry, it's a moment that I'll never get old, like, I'll never get sick of, right? It's this idea that you've, imparted some sort of knowledge onto someone else. And then, like I say, I can't say it enough. I'm so blessed to be in the situation that I'm in. So if I'm able to pass that on to, another set of paralegals entering the industry, that, one day might be my competition, one day might be the opposing party to a matter, at least I know, or at least I'd hope that I taught them well, to, interact with me appropriately as the opposing party, or to treat their client with, the respect and the best interest of their client in mind. Right. So I would hope that I had imparted that over the, couple of semesters that I would teach them. And we have an incredible faculty outside of me at Georgian. So all of us really putting our all towards getting these students out in the best shape that they can be, to then go write the exam and become practicing paralegals. And I also like when, so I host students every year, and a couple I've kept, like, I've heard, like, I've hired on a few, but then seeing what happens to the rest of them, right? Like, where do they end up, a year from now? The last time I see them when they're in my office, what happened? Where did they go? Where did they end up, right? It's nice to see kind of what comes of you teaching them.
That is excellent. I mean, I think I take, obviously, when, like days today where people have passed the exam, or later on they come back and they say, I'm practicing, I'm doing well. And I often bring them back here to talk to the next generation of students.
Yeah.
It is such a reward there. And I'm sure your students appreciate all the time and energy you've put in guiding them in their practice, in their future practice, right? And learning to get through the next steps on the way. So wondering maybe if you can end here with, thank you so much, Christina, for joining us. Maybe you could end with some final words of wisdom there, what you would share with students, anyone listening, about, getting into practice and succeeding as a paralegal. And I think it's great that you have, different offices, you have associates there. I think especially for paralegals, you don't see too much of that other than sort of the bigger franchises. And I think that shows, that there is certainly opportunities there, that you don't necessarily have to be only on your own. What can you share kind of for students? And thanks again for joining.
Oh, happy to, and thanks for having me. I just say not everybody's path is going to be the same. don't compare yourself to your classmates. Don't compare yourself to me. Don't compare yourself to anybody in the industry. Every path is going to be different, and it's going to ultimately get you to where you're supposed to be. And just put yourself out there. Try and absorb as much as you can over your time in school, and then your time studying and writing the licensing exam and your placement. Absorb everything that you possibly can. Put that into play, but just know that everybody's going to be in a different place, and that's okay. And if your path doesn't necessarily go the way you thought it would go, that's fine too. And if you can get to someone that you can think of as a mentor, I didn't have one, and I really wish I did. And I'm happy to do it to any student that asks, or any new licensee that asks. If you can get someone to help you and mentor you through at least your first couple of years in the industry, if not, they become like a colleague for life. That's huge and going to be really helpful. But if ever I can be of any assistance to anybody that's watching or listening, you can reach out to me anytime. I'm honestly happy to help, and kind of give back to those that are trying to come up in the industry. And thank you again, JP, for having me. It's been great. If you ever want to have me back, I'm happy to come back. And then I hope to see a lot of the people that are listening or watching in the industry one day soon.
Perfect. Definitely. I'll reach out again. Maybe one of these days we can have something with both of our classes or something in the future. That'd be
perfect.
Great too. So all the best. Thanks everyone for tuning in. And thanks, Christina, again for joining us, and take care and stay safe, everyone.
Bye, everyone.